Good morning.
Good morning.
Little switcheroo. It's nice to see you.
You too, Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome you. Welcome me. And of course, the kitties. They're behaving today. Sort of. We will see. Um, so, again, questions and good ones. We're going to continue on from where we were on Tuesday. And thank you so much, Dr. Rosensweet, always for doing this. It's delightful for me, for sure.
Me too. Me too. It's very delightful for me too.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that the women appreciate it for sure. And the men that speak up do too. So, true. So here we go. Okay. Question number, well, actually, it's 4, comes in saying, does estrogen and insulin resistance have anything to do with one another? I'm not taking estrogen and have just been diagnosed with insulin resistance, and I'm wondering if taking estrogen might be helpful for this.
Great question.
I know, huh?
Why is it so great? Because things happen to human beings the longer we're on Earth. And some health adverse events take place within our bodies. And the health adverse events always relate to issues around nutrition, toxic exposure, detoxification, exercise too much or too little, and a dysfunctional response to stress. It's not the stress, it's the dysfunctional response to stress where we trigger fight or flight biology. And then there's some never understandable by ordinary means causes as well. So there's 5 things there. And those 5 things, they're challenging for our physical bodies that have come in so strong and so resilient in so many instances and give us the power of youth. Fabulous. But meanwhile, even that tremendous vitality of youth is being undermined from the day we're conceived on. And it shows up in common ways. And insulin and insulin resistance is one of them. For example, we eat food and that food gets digested and circulated to every cell in our body. And many things happen. And one of the things that happen is that food is, quote, metabolized. It enters a biochemical process in which, oh my God, electrons are exchanged and oxygen's involved. Holy mackerel. And what the outcome is biologically is that energy and heat are produced. And carbon dioxide is outgassed. Take in oxygen, take in food. Out comes the carbon dioxide, the energy, and the heat. Every cell of the body. It's just so remarkable. And the food that we eat, there's 3 major energy producing aspects of the food. There's protein. Can you see me or?
You're frozen to me, but I can hear you. Oh, no, there you are. You're moving.
There's when I'm talking about the food that we eat, excuse me, I'm talking about 3 components of the food that relate to energy production. It's the protein part of the food, the fat part of the food, and the carbohydrate part of the food. And they all participate and they all do important things. And one of the important things that is absolutely needed is the carbohydrate portion.
Interesting.
Because the carbohydrate portion ultimately gets broken down to glucose, a simple sugar. And it's gotten a bad rap because of abuses in our diet. But holy mackerel, our brains need glucose to function. It's a really high octane. I think of it as the rocket fuel. You know, you think of diesel fuel as slower burning. I don't know if I've got that correct or not, but the glucose is the rocket fuel. It oxidizes really readily. And our brains need that level of energy to get done what they need to get done. And so we don't get to not have carbohydrates in our diet. We just want to have the right carbohydrates.
So, I mean, would that be like lox and bagels in the morning?
Not necessarily.
Exactly.
So you're setting me up here.
You don't miss a beat. Love
Rather
that.
than go into the specifics of nutrition, which I really leave up to the army of health coaches and nutritionists and health-oriented folks,
But
I'm
the
just
good carbs.
going to go to a different technical aspect. That because glucose oxidizes so easily and is so intense, it's like jet fuel. The body has a protective mechanism around handling glucose that is just astounding. Glucose has its own designated hormone to regulate how much or how little is in the blood. And the body's very careful about it because it does not want high blood glucose levels. Glucose oxidizes too easily. That can cause trouble. So glucose is one of the most, of many things that are heavily regulated. Glucose is one of the most intensely regulated substances in our bloodstream. So we don't go too high and we don't go too low. And the regulator is a designated hormone, designated solely to glucose, insulin. And what insulin does is it helps glucose leave the bloodstream and go into the cells. And it's inside the cells where that metabolic process takes place. So, for example, if you drink a soft drink that's loaded with sugar, your blood glucose, that's going to get absorbed right away, and your blood glucose is going to rise to alarming levels, and your body doesn't want that. So it shoots out a bunch of insulin and takes that glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells. Now, I'm going to remove us from the world of drinking soft drinks because those are too challenging. We don't get away with doing soft drinks. Let's say vegetables. Let's say you have a carrot. Well, there's glucose in carrots. It's readily available. And it too, when you digest that carrot, it's going to go right into the bloodstream, the glucose portion. And your blood glucose is going to rise. And insulin is, the body sees that rise in blood glucose, and it responds by putting out some insulin. And that insulin takes the glucose that came from the carrot out of the bloodstream and puts it in the cells. Another simple, short explanation by me. Now, we're meant to eat vegetables and roots. Grains are a little debatable, but all these things that I'm naming have glucose in them. Vegetables, roots. When did we have access to soft drinks? We've been around for a couple 100,000 years, and only in the last century did we have access to orange juice and soft drinks and stuff like that. And good morning, Krishna and Antoinette.
Good morning.
Yeah. So,
well,
these new offerings of simplified carbohydrates are challenging to the human body. We live 200,000 years with very few people having access to any simple carbohydrates. Only the Floridians of old who could access oranges,
our neighbors,
had any reasonable access to really simple super carbohydrates. Fruits themselves often have access to simple carbohydrates, But, people aren't going to eat 8 oranges in the morning. But if you drink a soft drink, and what happens is your blood glucose rises really quickly. And you keep doing that day after day after day with simple carbohydrates, and you start wearing down that glucose insulin regulating mechanism. That's the rub. We're so resilient that it used to be back in the day that it took you about half a lifetime to wear it down. And even in medical school in the 60s, I was taught by internal medicine professors that given enough time, everyone develops diabetes. Everyone develops diabetes. What's diabetes? It's when you beat up that insulin glucose regulating mechanism so much that it can no longer do the job. And when you're young and you drink you have sugar on something, or you have a simple carbohydrate, it goes in your bloodstream, the insulin responds, the glucose in the bloodstream goes into the cells, bravo. But if you're challenging that by too much simple carbohydrates over time, you wear this system down and you develop something called, and here's the punchline, insulin resistance.
Kind of a scary thing to hear if you don't really know what that is.
That's the first, yes. It should call forth fear.
Yeah.
Because it's given people a lot of trouble. Like, for example, so many people have weight issues and they don't like it. They don't like gaining extra weight. And of course, it's not necessarily healthy to gain extra weight. I'm not talking about naturally robust body types. That's different than excessive weight gain. We come in all shapes and sizes. God bless all of us, even if we have extra weight. That's not the problem that's causing the threat that's threatening the earth.
Right. Right.
So God bless all of us. But people put on, and people really tend to put on weight midlife that they don't like. And what's causing that? Well, in our book that Carolyn's posted on that you can download the PDF version of, we have a whole chapter on weight, and I go into this in depth, and I go into insulin resistance in depth. And midlife insulin resistance is an issue, and it's one of the main issues how people gain weight that they don't like.
That book, by the way, is Happy, Healthy Hormones. It's downloadable. It's at the very, very top of the Ins and Outs of Menopause page, or group, by the way. And we'll be getting another PDF version via Sherry, by the way.
Days we'll get this edition. So the question was around, how about estrogen?
Yeah.
Well, what we're dealing with is midlife. And I wanted to mention insulin resistance because that was part of the question.
Mm-hmm.
It's so common. And you know what's really almost just a real grief that I see that's happened over the course of my medical career and life is insulin resistance used to be a phenomena of people in their 50s and 60s. We see teenagers with adult onset diabetes.
Not type 2, but 1. Yeah.
So it's gotten much worse, and it's dietary and stress related. Coincident with midlife is the cessation of the ovaries of producing ovarian hormones. Estrogen's one of them. Progesterone's another. Testosterone's another. Well, these hormones are the most powerful biochemicals in our body, and they all influence the vitality of metabolism. Progesterone, for example, it is such a powerful influencer of metabolism that mid-cycle, when progesterone really comes out in robust amounts in a young menstruating woman, her temperature increases.
Mm-hmm.
Progesterone facilitates the function of thyroid hormone, which is a major player that influences the vigor of metabolism, thus energy and heat. Progesterone facilitates the action of. So having adequate progesterone is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because having adequate thyroid hormone function relates to rate of metabolism, to have the most vigorous metabolism to burn the food that you're eating, to oxidize the food you're eating. You want to have adequate thyroid, that's for sure. Oh, that's a midlife issue. People put too much pressure on that thyroid gland, and functional hypothyroidism, that means not thyroid disease, but a thyroid that's no longer pumping out youthful levels. That's common in midlife. So I'm really naming two things that have to do with weight gain: insulin resistance and thyroid function. And thyroid function without the progesterone, which disappears. In fact, progesterone can decline earlier and faster than estrogen does long before midlife,
Yes.
even in their 30s. Thus, no thyroid function. Thus, of many consequences of that, a metabolism that's not so vigorous, so you start putting on the weight. And then estrogen. Estrogen is so critical for so many functions. I mean, there's estrogen receptors everywhere in the body. And estrogen doesn't have quite the direct effect that thyroid does on the accelerator, the pedal for metabolism. But man, you just don't want to be losing these hormones, estrogen and testosterone. Women have more testosterone than they have estrogen. Testosterone is not a male hormone. It's a human hormone. And estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and DHEA are very, very important for healthy metabolism as well, healthy function. And when women start losing their estrogen, they start putting on weight in places that they don't like. So though I can't give you the precise, well, yes, there is. There is Diana Schwartzbein, an endocrinologist, a longtime proponent of replenishing hormones in women. She was an attendee of our very first summit in 2005. She's pointed out this relationship very clearly as an endocrinologist, specialist in hormones, right? What happens is when a woman is stressed, she triggers, so do men, a fight or flight biology. And at the vanguard of that fight or flight biology, giving the energy to run or fight a saber-toothed tiger, is adrenaline and cortisol. Bam. They do so many things to help you run from that saber-toothed tiger or fight it. But they're not the only hormones recruited. Estrogen's recruited. Testosterone's recruited, because these are energizing hormones. And I've said this many times, and for any of you who are watching women athletes, gymnasts, Olympic athletes, soccer players, you name it, where their training programs are very intense, they're stressful training programs. And so many of these women are not menstruating because their estrogen, instead of going down the female pathway, is part of it's going down the stress pathway, and thus they're not forming endometrial linings and not menstruating. Estrogen's a stress hormone. What happens in midlife when there's not as much estrogen available and a woman's stressed? She can't rely on the additional contributions to the biology of the stress response of estrogen and testosterone. She winds up depleting testosterone and estrogen for the stress that she does. But when those ovaries stop working, she can't marshal all of the hormonal tools she'd like to have for the fight or flight response. So she has to rely more heavily on cortisol and adrenaline.
Ew.
And these are promoters of insulin resistance. And there's reasons why they are. That's a natural function for them. And so when you've got excessive cortisol more than you ordinarily would, you're promoting insulin resistance. So that low estrogen and the low testosterone coming out of those ovaries, no longer recruitable in the robust amounts for the stress response, woman has to rely heavier on cortisol and adrenaline. This is hyperglycemic making, and it's insulin resistance making, and it's a recipe for weight gain. So there's a convergence of several issues that relate to lower metabolism and weight gain midlife, and that's why I wanted to bring them all in. So the questioner asked, does estrogen play a role to insulin resistance? Yeah, they're all related. Low estrogen, got to rely heavier on the cortisol. Cortisol is a recipe for insulin resistance. That's how they're related, and that's how the weight gain occurs. So untangling that thing, we'll go to our chapter. All you have to do is increase your skills around how you're dealing with the stress in your life. So you're not triggering the biology of the stress response. That's required. You got to tune up your diet. You got to exercise. It's the same old stuff. That's the great news. Everyone has total control over their health and their recovery. And it takes you down to proper nutrition, proper exercise, getting some real skills around the stress in your life. I didn't say eliminate the stress in your life. This is a natural part of human life. I said increase your skills so you're not triggering the biology of fight or flight.
Right.
And detoxifying, making sure that your household and your habits don't have toxins in them, and that you do a project to detoxify what's in there. So the good news is ultimately that control and your ability to recover, you can become a personal expert in your own nutrition. You can become a personal expert in your exercise. Easier said than done. Sometimes you got to lift yourself up by your bootstraps to get your tojas in gear.
That's the thing you're sitting on, by the way, everybody.
Thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Where was it? Nutrition. You can become an expert in nutrition for yourself, exercise for yourself, detoxification for yourself. It's not complicated. There's a few things you can do. And then in my life, I reached out and sought a tremendous amount of support for working with my own emotions and my own consciousness and my own life, so that I did two things. I deal so much better with the stress of life, and magically you reduce it when you handle your own internal self. Then there are the mysterious factors, and I'm not going to go into that. But the primary thing is insulin resistance, weight gain, all this stuff. It's all manageable, and you can replenish your hormones like an expert. There's people out there, our whole menopause method, that's what we're all about, is treating women in menopause and men in andropause now with compounded bioidentical hormones. You can do it. You know what else I'd like you to put a link on, Carolyn, while I'm thinking about it, is Deborah Matthews, a medical doctor, has done this fabulous interview with Dr. Oz.
Oh, okay.
And would you please send me an email so I can remind you to post this link? You'll love it. You'll absolutely love it. In a minute and a half, Dr. Oz just nails what's so critical about compounded bioidentical hormones. It's beautiful.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I'll be right on that right after we get off, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I'll go on to the next question in a sec, but Antoinette says, why is it that when I take testosterone, I get more facial hair and lose the hair on my head? I've attempted this several times. Could it be I'm under stress? Meaning I am under stress and possibly my estrogen is converting into too much testosterone, thus causing an overload.
Maybe Antoinette would post some more information, like, is she still menstruating? Is she in the perimenopause? What age she is? I can better answer that. But it's not the testosterone per se, it's an overdose of testosterone.
Ah.
It's too much. And there is this quirk, and this is why, Antoinette, please post your age and whether you're in the perimenopause. Oh, okay. And when was your last period? This is the magic of the internet, right? We get to find out. It's just miraculous.
She'll figure it out in a second.
My guess is at 60 years old, it's been a while since your last period, and that you're taking testosterone. And the issue is you're taking too much. And this is a common error that's taking place. One of the ways that this often takes place is through pellets. I'm not a fan of pellets. And yeah, Antoinette, please tell us how long ago your last period was.
She said hysterectomy in 2008, but have ovaries.
Yes, but I see. But still, at 60 years old, it's very unlikely that those ovaries are functioning. And my guess is that Antoinette's being treated with estrogens, hopefully biased, with progesterone, and with testosterone, and probably DHEA. And your balance isn't correct. That's the whole thing, Antoinette. This is the great art of individualization. And interestingly enough, this is what Dr. Oz says is so important. He says it so eloquently. You got to get all of these 4 ovarian hormones right. And when they're not balanced properly, now I'm not aware that estradiol can turn into testosterone. Yes, testosterone can turn into estrogen via aromatization. So I don't think that's what's going on there. And I just think your estrogen levels, your testosterone levels, your DHEA levels, and your progesterone levels are not optimal for your body. And that clue of getting that mustache hair, facial hair, tells me that you're out of balance. And so your job is the same job that every woman has. You have to seek out someone to treat you with compounded bioidentical hormones that really knows what they're doing and is testing by 24-hour urine. Because you don't get to find these things out unless you are. And I'm still staying with 24-hour urine until proven otherwise. I'm not saying anything else. I'm not saying the urine 5-point. You get to see the balance, and someone who really knows what they're doing is going to take into account that you're getting this excessive hair. So it's once again hunkering down on the details of individualizing it for you specifically, Antoinette. Why I asked how old you were is because there's this less common situation in a woman who's still menstruating, but she's in her 40s, she's in the perimenopause, her ovarian output is getting a little erratic, her estrogen's dropped enough that there's some women who've got the oomph left. You got to have this oomph left. You have to have ovarian and adrenal oomph left. I'm going to explain that. OOOOMPH. Oomph.
Exclamation point.
You got to have the ovarian and the adrenal oomph left. There's some women, as their estrogen drops and they're in the perimenopause and their ovaries are still functioning, or even their adrenal glands, they can do this biological finesse where they increase the testosterone levels and convert some of their testosterone to estradiol. So they're compensating for their estrogen, which is dropped, by increasing their testosterone output. And testosterone can not only come out of the ovaries, it comes out of the adrenals too. Now, why the oomph thing? I used to see more of this happen in the perimenopause than I have lately. And I think it's because the level of stress has taxed the female and male population to the extent that they no longer have this oomph in the perimenopause. But just last month, I met a woman, a new patient in the perimenopause. She was developing facial hair, and she was still menstruating, and and she also had symptoms of estrogen insufficiency,
Mm.
started to get sleep disturbance and stuff of the estrogen low variety. All we did was treat her with estrogen, and the facial hair started going away, and the oily skin. She was also getting acne. We provided the extra estrogen. There was no longer a need for to convert her own internal testosterone to estrogen, so she didn't have elevated levels of testosterone anymore, and she normalized. It's an example of doing the balance in the perimenopause, but this is not so for a 60-year-old. It'd be so unlikely, Antoinette, it's possible, but it'd be so unlikely that your ovaries are still contributing. Your testosterone is most likely coming, and you can correct me in the chat here. It's so likely that your testosterone is coming from the testosterone you're taking. It's almost I've never seen a woman 3 years into the end of ovarian production that had adequate testosterone ever. So if you don't have adequate, you don't have excessive.
Yeah.
But the to do is the same.
She still has oomph.
Yeah, it's in the mucosa. It absorbs really well, so it's a dosage issue. That's my first guess, and a balance, because I don't know how much estrogen you're on.
Got it.
So
Got it.
there we go, Antoinette.
God, well, thank you, Dr. Rosensweet, so much. This question, comes in perfectly where it says, does estrogen and, I think it comes in well. May we please revisit progesterone and cortisol? 12.5 milligrams of progesterone gave me wicked anxiety. And I'm wondering, Dr. R, if you've ever heard of progesterone turning into cortisol and then that cortisol spiking, causing anxiety. Thank you.
Well, I understand why people would ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the world of hormone creation internally in the body, progesterone converts into cortisol. Cortisol is made out of progesterone. And this is just phenomenally illustrated in these biochemical roadmaps, where, for example, you show how these steroid hormones are created and where they're created out of is cholesterol. Cholesterol gets converted to a hormonally active next step called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone gets converted to progesterone. Progesterone gets converted to cortisol. So the biochemical origin of cortisol really comes from progesterone. However, I have never seen a direct correlation between treating a woman with progesterone and her cortisol getting excessive. What we do see is some women go into the perimenopause and menopause a little lowish on the cortisol side. I mean, they've been stressed. They can no longer, their adrenal glands no longer put out the amount of corticosteroids. And we don't treat with cortisol. And 99% of the women that we see, even with lowish corticosteroids, because what we'll do if we replenish the estrogens, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA, the corticosteroids will recover on their own.
Mm.
And it's a matter of resources, and I'm not going to go into the details there, but I can tell you that happens. But we have to replenish the estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. and you get some nice recovery almost universally. So what we train our providers with is when you see low corticosteroids, just don't immediately give them Cortef. You won't have to. You replenish the ovarian hormones, you'll see, because now there's more resources for the adrenal glands to produce cortisol and corticosteroids, you'll see a recovery there. 99 times out of 100.
That's up there.
Now, there's a lot of women who are on very rich, robust doses of progesterone, really high levels. And we don't see high levels of corticosteroids in these women. So although when you look at a biochemical roadmap, you'd think, well, oh God, if I increase my butter intake, or I increase my cholesterol intake, or I increase my progesterone intake, I'm going to raise my cortisol. Nope, just doesn't happen. It's a good theory. It does follow the biochemical roadmap, but it doesn't happen practically. You're not going to be able to jack up your progesterone, your cortisol, from just giving yourself progesterone. You'll help it, but it's not only replenishing the progesterone that's going to help. It's replenishing the biest and the testosterone and the DHEA as well. That'll help the corticosteroids recover. And so not get excessive. You are not going to get excessive corticosteroids from replenishing your ovarian hormones under normal circumstances if you're doing a good job of it. Now, the nervousness. I don't know what that nervousness is. That was embedded in that question.
Yes, it was.
Because there are some people who get nervous with elevated cortisol levels. A lot of people get high. They feel better. In the 1950s, when cortisol became commercially available for physicians to prescribe, a lot of it was given out. Ton of it was given out. Why? Because people felt better. Why? Because so many people by midlife had adrenal insufficiency and they weren't putting out these optimal levels of cortisol. Cortisol does something that other hormones don't necessarily do. You take too much thyroid hormone, or too much estrogen, or too much testosterone, or too much progesterone, you're going to get side effects. They're not side effects, they're overdose effects, as we list on this card that Carolyn's also posted from time to time. You might want to post it again, Carolyn. These hormones are powerful, and in most, but not all instances, you take too much of the hormones I just named, you're going to feel crappy. You're going to have some overdose effects, not side effects. They're overdose effects. Cortisol is different. You give a lot of people, not everybody, some people really do get upset and get emotional and don't like excessive levels of cortisol. But a lot of people who've been given overdoses of cortisol, they like it. They get high. And it was a real problem in the 50s because so many people were given these high doses because doctors didn't yet understand what was the proper dosage. We learned pretty quickly, and major warnings were given out by the time I entered medical school. Be careful with that cortisol. But a lot of these people were on these excessive doses. They loved it, and it was hard to get them off of it because they liked how good they felt. So, all these stories are complex, but they come down to the same thing. Do the right dosages. And you're playing with fire here because these are the most powerful biochemicals in our body. All of them, all these hormones. You name the hormone, they're the most powerful. It's not the same as taking vitamin B complex. You can take a lot of B complex. You're not going to get jacked up to the moon here. You probably won't even feel it.
True.
You take too much of these hormones, you're going to feel it in most instances.
Well, the cortisol thing, I mean, what made that so bad, like
overdose? Because when cortisol became commercially available, and doctors started treating patients with it, and the patients felt better. That was an exciting moment. Hey,
Yeah.
give somebody to something that they feel better, and that their inflammatory symptoms go down, like rheumatoid arthritis, etc. That was an exciting moment. But what was not understood, and the testing wasn't available, was what was the proper dosage.
Mm.
Well, it was learned pretty quickly, but not before the cat had gotten out of the bag, or put in the bag, or
Stayed in the bag or whatever.
yeah, right. Where so much had been given out that there were a lot of people who had been overdosed. And then a medical doctor wrote a book called Safe Uses of Cortisol, and they really, the medical profession came around pretty quickly, because the overdose symptoms of cortisol were being observed. I mean, you get moon faces, you get a buffalo hump of fat deposited on your upper back, you get all kinds of different things. You get suppression of the immune system. But I'm talking about overdose. And that's not happening anymore. Doctors are really have been are really cautious, and
Yeah.
they use cortisol when they need it. Any good doctor is going to use cortisol when you need it. You get a bee sting and your throat's closing up there.
Generally speaking, that needs
You
treatment.
need it. And
Absolutely.
there's right uses of cortisol. It's beautiful. And there is a small percentage of people who don't get high when they get excessive levels of cortisol. They get weird. They feel awful. So the only thing I can't say about to the questioner is, she mentioned anxiety, and there's an easy way to tell. You work with a provider who really understands these hormones. They'll help you sort it out.
Yeah, that anxiety is no fun for sure.
Now, if the woman says that, I didn't get the anxiety until I replenished progesterone, is that right, Carolyn?
Well, she says she's taking 12.5 milligrams of progesterone. It gave her wicked anxiety, wondering if you had ever heard of progesterone turning into cortisol, and then that cortisol spiking, causing the anxiety.
Well, 12.5 milligrams of progesterone is, I'm going to assume that is topical progesterone, because that's a dosage level for topical. It is a dosage level for oral. That is a low dose. Useful for some women in the perimenopause, early on in their 30s and 40s. So I'm going to say the number one, that did not convert to cortisol, and cortisol is not the cause of your anxiety. However, I mean, you never say never in medicine. I mean, there's going to be someone that I'm going to be wrong about that. Even though 82,000 out of 82,001 patients are not going to get elevated, that one patient out of 82,000 is. So you never say never in medicine.
Right.
But I'm just giving you the odds on. Now, there are some women who have some challenges with progesterone, and it's a real thing.
And we hear about it a lot.
Young menstruating women have 100 times more progesterone than they have estrogen. It's very rare for a woman in menopause to have difficulty with estrogen. Extremely rare. It's very rare for a woman to have a challenge with topical testosterone. Extremely rare. It's usually an overdose, an improper dose, or an improper balance issue. Progesterone, it's rare for a woman to have trouble with progesterone, but it happens. And there's different kinds of trouble. The most common trouble we see is a woman who's had an ovarian removal, a hysterectomy with the removal of her ovaries when she was young. And the way we picture it is their progesterone receptor sites just shut down. They just go dormant. And then when you give her a progesterone, it's like a tsunami hit the few remaining progesterone receptor sites, and they have trouble with progesterone. They get depressed, these women often. They get sleepy, they get groggy on very low dosages. Although I have never heard, though, here we go, it's medicine. And if this woman is having trouble on 12.5 milligrams of progesterone, even though this would be a brand new one on me, but I learn something new every week. So there's nothing new about a new thing. but I don't know. You could have there's women who have allergies to their own progesterone or to progesterone. There's women who have allergies to the carrier, what progesterone is carried in. So there is a simple way to find out, and my guess this questioner has found this out. She took the progesterone, she felt awful. She stopped the progesterone, she got herself back. Maybe she even took the progesterone again just to see if was it really the progesterone. She felt awful. So she's making a statement to us. And the part of the woman's statement that I do honor is she took progesterone, 12.5 milligrams, and she had some kind of very uncomfortable experience. That happens, it's rare, and there's ways to address it. The part that I didn't necessarily agree with is that the progesterone became cortisol and the cortisol gave her trouble. I'm going to say that no. I mean, you never say never, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say no, that was not the cause. It wasn't elevated cortisol. But I do honor and respect that this woman took progesterone. She had trouble with it. And I don't know what the percentage of women who replenish progesterone and have trouble with it is. It's way low, but it's real. You talk to any seasoned provider who's been prescribing to women in menopause, they're going to all say, and this happened on grand rounds yesterday. We have a bunch of providers on our grand rounds, and I threw the topic out because once again, and I said, how many of you have encountered women who have trouble with progesterone? Every single one of them, of the seasoned vets, had yeah, that exception does occur.
Well, we hear about it here a lot, on our Facebook Lives.
And the bottom line is, how do you manage a situation like that? And your best shot is doing the job, the fundamental job for an individual woman is to go shopping until you find a healthcare provider that has knowledge and experience. They'll help you sort it out. And there's rare instances in which we let go of a woman taking progesterone. She will take bias, she will take testosterone, she will take DHEA. But right now in my practice, I have one patient she can only take extremely low doses of progesterone. Let me give you the example. How much is she taking? She's taking less than 12.5 milligrams 2 days out of 3. If she takes it, then the third day she starts not feeling good, gets progesterone overdose symptoms. So, there's so many molecules that we need. There's so many moving parts to living well. We all have to work the best we can with what we got. And not having progesterone is not the end of the world. No way. There's thousands of things we're not getting enough of or we have too much of. And that's on a molecular level. That's on an emotional level. That's on a life level. That's on a consciousness level. That's on a choice level. That's on a monetary level. They're also interconnected. So in the general scheme of things, not being able to tolerate 12.5 milligrams of progesterone is like a drop in the ocean. Don't worry about it. This would be my father's statement. Don't worry about it.
Mine was, well, that's that. Oh, well, that's that. We're coming up to that bewitching hour, and I have these questions, but I don't want to ask them exactly because I know that they'll entail a long answers, but I will ask this one. And I also want to say that maybe you and I again can do one of those great interviews where we get more into like the psychology, of what goes on in the change of life. That was a really great interview that we did. You had some wonderful things to say as to how we can make menopause a little bit easier for ourselves, not through.
I'm merely a tool of your decision making for your ins and outs of menopause. So you schedule it, we'll do it.
The sole purpose. It's the highlight, honestly. I swear, of my week. It is. This woman is saying, I'm moody, I'm depressed, I have no joy or happiness, and I'm hotter than hot. All the time I'm miserable. Everyone is cold and freezing and wearing sweaters, except me. It is now a good year, and I feel more messed up than I did a year ago. And Carolyn says to Carolyn that Carolyn doesn't know if this woman is or is not taking hormones. So that's a very kind of like...
I have an opinion about that.
Oh, yeah, I bet you do.
The highest likelihood is, from just what I heard, I wouldn't go out on a limb to say this woman is in menopause, and if she's taking hormones, she doesn't have the right amount or the right balance.
Right.
And these are dramatic symptoms. And 75% of women in midlife, as their hormones decline, have a small, medium, large, or humongous life-stopping dramatic symptoms. 75%. And I've always considered a woman who has this particular experience to be amongst the fortunate women, because this woman is motivated to try and figure this one out.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make it, one of my favorite things that happens during my week is when I'm working with one of our patients and the woman says, oh my God, I've got myself back. So many women have said this very same statement, just as this woman, and I understand and appreciate, having done this for 28 years, that this is very life disabling. And yeah, women are strong enough to muscle through, but it's disruptive. And yet the great news is you're amongst the fortunate, because you're going to be driven to do something about this. And I highly encourage you to do that. And here's your job. You have to go shopping and find yourself a licensed healthcare provider who can prescribe hormones. That means a physician, nurse practitioner, physician's assistants, and in some states, a prescribing compounding pharmacist. You got to go shopping to find one that, number one, you like, and number two, they're educated in treating women with hormones, and number three, they have some experience or they're getting mentored. Like, for example, in the menopause method, we have some physicians and nurse practitioners who are new to this, but they're getting mentored on every case, and they're getting the education, a major education on our menopause method online educational program. So your job with all these symptoms is to get this properly dealt with. And what's going to properly deal with it is your hormones, because you are missing estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA to a major extent. And it's just an illustration of how important these things are. And you don't have a disease. You've got this thing called your ovaries are not doing it anymore. Well, for 200,000 years, it wasn't a big deal because women didn't live into menopause. And men passed away earlier than women did for the most part. But there's this new thing called hygiene and nutrition and whatever other miracles are taking place, that women are living beyond 40 years old.
Yeah. And they're beautiful and amazing.
And nature, so to speak, has decided that it's probably not best to have babies after midlife. Better to be a grandparent. Yeah. So the ovaries get turned off for one reason or another. And you're having the consequence of these powerful hormones that are so influential not being there. But the great news is this is 2022 and you're at the perfect moment in history. There is so much known and there's so much expertise. Not the level of expertise we'd like out there. Our menopause method team, our IOBIM team, Institute of Bioidentical Medicine team, we've got a goal this next year of getting 8 providers in each state that are excellent at this, and we're training them.
Beautiful.
So stay tuned. But your job is you don't have it's very unlikely that you have an illness. It's almost certain that questionnaire you have low ovarian hormones and this is what it's like, and they're so strong that this is how bad it gets. But the good news is you're going to be motivated. You got fire in the butt. So go out there and find you a provider who knows what they're doing.
I see. You got 2 minutes. 2 minutes, Dr. Rosensweet. You know.
Dan Rosen's question up there.
I'm sorry?
In the chat, Jan is asking a question.
Oh, hi, Jan. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I can only see part of this. Under what circumstances would you prescribe pregnenolone to a postmenopausal woman?
Yeah.
Well, we don't ordinarily prescribe pregnenolone. I know that why that's being done is pregnenolone is a precursor to all the ovarian hormones, but we never rely on the precursors. Like we don't give a woman butter and hope she's going to turn out testosterone bias, progesterone, and DHEA. But theoretically, she could. If we get the cholesterol in the butter is going to give her all those hormones. We also don't give women we don't give women cholesterol, even though the biochemical pathway is you give them cholesterol, they should produce all these. We don't give women pregnenolone for the same reason, because we have no control about, is she going to produce with that pregnenolone the right amount of bias, the right amount of testosterone? No control. Now, there is an instance where we do give women pregnenolone, and it's not to produce the ovarian hormones. In World War II, pregnenolone, a study was done with pregnenolone. It's got some activity all of its own. It was given to factory workers in World War II and airplane pilots. And what they reported was increased mental acuity. Pregnenolone's got something to do with this brain up here. And anyone who's got cognitive decline, the first thing we do with cognitive decline in menopause, we replenish the ovarian hormones, and that's going to take care of a lot of cognitive decline. The second thing we do when the ovarian hormones don't initially take care of cognitive decline is we boost up that estrogen. That's the major step we take. And also, we'll give women pregnenolone because it can help with the function of the brain. So we do give pregnenolone for cognitive issues that aren't solved by adequate or even supercharged estrogen. We'll push that estrogen, even to the point of you getting your period back. If that's what gets your mind back, we'll give you that. There's a lot of moving parts for cognitive function. They're best described in a book by Dale Bredesen, MD, called The End of Alzheimer's. This is the expert. And you'll see that there's many moving parts to restoring cognitive function. But the most common one in a midlife woman is low hormones, low estrogen primarily. But again, pregnenolone is part of that mixture that we'll supplements. There's other stuff too that are given to men and women that have cognitive decline. We measure pregnenolone on the 24-hour urine hormone test, and if we see a low pregnenolone and we see some cognitive issues, we'll give pregnenolone. But we're giving pregnenolone for the functions of pregnenolone alone. We're not giving pregnenolone for the purpose of producing adequate estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA.
You remind me of when you were in Washington, but it went on for another 3 minutes. You didn't swallow, take a breath, nothing. So, Dr. Rosensweet, our dear Dr. Rosensweet, once again, you just did it. yeah, answered our questions and beautifully. And I really appreciate that a lot. And we're a little bit over, and I want to wish you a really, really, really nice weekend. I want to wish everybody a really, really, really nice weekend. And there you have it.
All right.
Thanks for you, everybody, being here, really. And yeah, have a great weekend. The happy Passover thing is still existing. Easter is come and gone. And
see you next time, everybody.
Enjoy.